He didn't drive to Wick Street to hear her side. He drove because Marlowe Hale had been branded a thief in front of his entire organization, and Emmerich Koval needed to watch her face when he called her one. 3 days before the merger that would bind the Koval name to the Sterlings forever, the woman who ran his empire from a desk outside his door was thrown out into the rain like spoiled inventory. When he finally climbed the 4 flights to her door, expecting to find her packing stolen money, the smell of cold ash and wet cardboard stopped him on the threshold. What he found in that emptied freezing room didn't just crack his ordered world open, it made him tear the merger apart with his bare hands. The painter's brush made a faint, dry whisper against the canvas, and Emmerich had been holding the same breath for 11 minutes. Chin, level, the artist murmured. You keep dropping it. Emmerich lifted his chin a fraction and stared past the man's shoulder, at the tall windows, where the harbor sat flat and gray, under a sky the color of a healing bruise. He stood on a low riser in the center of the gallery room, one hand resting on the back of an antique chair, wearing a slate 3-piece suit, cut close enough to hide the shoulder rig he refused to remove even for a portrait. The engagement portrait. It would hang in the Sterling estate by month's end, proof to 2 families that the alliance was real. He hated it already. You're scowling, Ophira said without looking up. She was arranged on the chaise across the room like something staged for sale. Pale silk, pale hair swept into a knot so severe it looked surgical, a phone glowing in her manicured hands. Ophira Sterling was beautiful. The way a bank vault was beautiful, engineered, cold to the touch, and built to keep people out. She thumbed through something on the screen, firing instructions to people whose names she would never trouble herself to learn. The gala seating is a disaster, she went on. My father wants your uncle's people at the far tables. He says they eat like animals. They're not my uncle's people. They're mine. They'll be ours soon enough. She smiled at her phone. White orchids, not the peonies. Peonies look like a funeral. Emmerich didn't answer. A dull ache had taken root at the base of his skull, the specific pressure he got when he was pretending to be a man who signed things instead of a man who buried them. The room smelled of linseed oil and expensive perfume, and old money, and underneath it all, faintly, of nothing at all. Sterile. That was the word for the whole arrangement. He didn't love Ophira, she didn't love him. They understood each other with perfect, frictionless clarity, which was precisely why the marriage was supposed to hold. A contract in white silk, 300 guests, 2 freight empires stitched into one. He shifted his weight, and the riser creaked. You moved, the painter sighed. Behind him, the double doors opened, without a sound, and the whole quality of the room changed. Marlowe Hale came in the way she always did, quietly, efficiently taking up exactly as much space as the task required, and no more. She was a woman built soft and solid, with dark hair pinned back off a round, tired face, wearing a charcoal dress and the flat, practical shoes she wore every day of her life. In one arm she balanced a tablet, a folder, and 2 coffees. She set the black one on the ledge beside Emmerich's hand, burning hot, no sugar, the way he'd taken it for 4 years without once having to ask, and kept the other for herself. The Ridgeline Manifest cleared customs an hour early, she said, low, so as not to disturb the sitting. I moved the Osborne shipment to Pier 9 before the inspectors rotated. Your 2 o'clock with the harbor commissioner is confirmed. And Mr. Voss is asking for the offshore reconciliation again. Give it to him when it's ready. Not before. It's ready. A pause, so slight only he would have caught it. I'm holding it. He glanced at her then, and something crossed her face and was gone. A flicker of strain, quickly folded away. She looked more tired than usual. There was a grayish cast under her eyes, and a stiffness in how she carried the folder, close against her chest like a shield. When he'd last seen her, Tuesday, she'd been at the shredder past midnight, feeding pages into it one at a time instead of by the handful, watching each one disappear. He'd meant to ask about that. Why are you holding it? He said. Marlowe met his eyes. For a moment she looked like she might tell him something. Then Ophira's voice cut across the room. Emmerich, the commissioner, tell your girl to reschedule. My father wants you at the estate by 4. She's not my girl, Emmerich said evenly. She's the reason your father's precious ports will still be running next week. Ophira laughed, a small silver sound with no warmth in it. How loyal of you, Marlowe, isn't it? Be a dear, and confirm the orchids. Marlowe's jaw tightened, almost invisibly. Of course. She turned to go. At the door she stopped, her hand flat against the wood, and looked back, not at Ophira, at Emmerich, with an expression he wouldn't understand until it was far too late. Whatever they tell you tomorrow, she said quietly, check the dates. Then she was gone, and the painter said, Sir, your chin. And Emmerich never got to ask her what she meant. They came for her at 9 the next morning. Emmerich was in the glass conference room on the 40th floor when it happened, and afterward he would remember it in the wrong order. The flash of movement in the hall, the 2 security men, Silas Voss rising smoothly from his chair, with a folder already open in his hands, as if he'd been waiting for a cue. We have a problem, Silas said. A serious one. Silas Voss had been the Koval consigliere for 30 years. He'd taught Emmerich how to hold a weapon in a gravel lot behind the old freight yards when the boy was 14. He'd stood at Emmerich's father's grave with rain running off his hat and sworn on the old man's coffin to keep the bloodline whole. He had a gentle, papery voice and the patient eyes of a family priest. He slid the folder across the table. The merger terms leaked. Sterling's people found them circulating 3 days ago. Routing numbers, the offshore structure, and the pure rotations. Everything. He let that settle. It came from inside. From her. The photographs were clean and damning. Marlowe at a cafe near the waterfront, passing a flash drive to a man in a gray coat. Wire logs with her access credentials stamped on them. A shell account in her name that Emmerich had never authorized. Fat. With a number that made his stomach drop. 800,000, Silas said softly. She's been selling us for months. Emmerich, I'm sorry. I know what she meant to you. Through the glass, Emmerich watched them walk her out. She didn't struggle. That was the thing he couldn't stop seeing later. She walked between the 2 men with her chin up and her arms full of nothing. They hadn't even let her take her coat. And she didn't look for him, didn't plead, and didn't perform innocence. At the elevator she turned once and found him through the glass wall, and she didn't say a word. She just looked at him, the way you'd look at someone from a train pulling out of a station. Then the doors closed. Freeze the account, Emmerich heard himself say. Cut her access. Put the word out. Marlowe Hale doesn't work in this city again. Already done, Silas murmured, and by nightfall it was. In a single day, the woman who had held the encryption keys to his entire operation lost her job, her name, her reputation, and every locked door in the city swung shut in her face. Emmerich told himself it was clean. Deserved. A liability handled. It nagged at him anyway. It started small, the way an infection does. That night, alone in his study with a glass of whiskey, he didn't drink. He pulled the folder open again and made himself read it like a ledger instead of a wound. The wire logs used her credentials, but Marlowe had built those systems. She knew, better than anyone alive, that every keystroke was time-stamped and traced. She would sooner have cut off her own hand than move money under her own name and leave it sitting there like a signed confession. It was too clumsy. It was clumsy the way a frame is clumsy when someone's in a hurry. Check the dates. He heard her voice say it. He turned to the wire logs and checked the dates. The first fraudulent transfer was stamped 2 days before the leak was discovered. Fine. But the photograph, the cafe, the man in the gray coat, was time-stamped a full week earlier than that. She'd been photographed passing a drive before there was anything to steal. Someone had taken the picture first and built the theft around it after. Emmerich sat very still, He thought of her hand flat against the door. Whatever they tell you tomorrow, she had known. She'd known it was coming. And she hadn't run. And she hadn't warned him plainly. Because, why? Because he wouldn't have believed her over Silas. Because a woman with no proof accusing the man who'd raised him would have looked exactly like a woman trying to blow up a merger to save her own skin. He picked up the phone and called his head of security and asked for one thing: Marlowe Hale's home address. When the text came through, he read it twice. Then a third time, certain it was a mistake. 412 Wick Street, Ashfield, Apt 4C. Wick Street. He knew it only as a name on incident reports. A dead-end artery in the Ashfield district, where the streetlights had been broken out for privacy, and the ambulances came slow, if they came at all. He paid Marlowe a salary that should have bought her a clean apartment downtown, with a doorman and covered parking. He'd assumed she lived somewhere like that. He had never thought to ask. Why was she living there? On what he paid her, why was she living like someone with nothing left to lose? Emmerich stood, took his coat off the hook and checked the magazine of the pistol under his arm, out of pure habit. "Merrick," he said, into the intercom. "Bring the car around. We're going to Ashfield." A pause. "Boss, Wick Street's a bad stretch. You sure? Drive the car, Merrick." He was 3 days from a wedding, and he was walking out the door to find the thief he'd just destroyed, not yet knowing that she was the only person in his empire who hadn't betrayed him. The city changed by degrees, and Emmerich watched it happen through a windshield smeared with rain. The financial district let go of them slowly, the glass towers thinning, the clean, wide avenues fraying at the edges. Then the car crossed the old rail line into Ashfield, and the world seemed to lose its color all at once. The buildings hunched. Storefronts sat behind steel shutters tagged with paint. A traffic light swung on its wire over an empty intersection, cycling green to red for no one. The rain came down thin and cold and steady, the kind that got into a man's collar and stayed. "This is it, up here," Marek said, low. He'd stopped making conversation a mile back. "Wick's the dead end past the laundromat," and Marek said nothing. He was doing arithmetic he didn't like. He paid Marlowe well. Better than well, he'd set her salary himself, years ago, after the third time she'd caught an error that would have cost him a shipment, because a person who could do that was worth keeping, and worth keeping loyal. That money should have bought her a life, a doorman, a parking spot, a window that looked at something other than this. So where had it gone? He thought of her at the shredder past midnight, feeding pages, one at a time. He thought of the stiffness in how she'd carried the folder. Not tired, he understood now, careful, the way a person moved when something already hurt. He catalogued it as fatigue, because fatigue was convenient, because he had a portrait to sit for, and a wedding to survive, and 100 small refusals to look closely, stacked up over 4 years into one large blindness. The car rolled past the laundromat and into the dead end. Number 412 was the last building on the left, a 4-story brick tenement slouched against its neighbor like a drunk against a wall. Half the windows were dark. One on the top floor was broken and stuffed with a garbage bag that snapped and billowed in the wind. "Wait here," Emmerich said. "Keep it running, boss. At least, let me keep it running, Merrick." He stepped out into the rain. There was no buzzer, only a bank of dented mailboxes, and a front door with a cracked pane held together by a strip of duct tape gone gray with age. It wasn't locked. It wasn't even latched. The frame was splintered around the strike plate, the wood pale and fresh where it had broken, recently, from the outside. Emmerich stopped with his palm pressed to the splintered wood and felt the first cold finger of dread walk up his spine. He went in. The stairwell smelled of damp plaster and old cooking grease, and underneath it, something sharper. He couldn't place yet a single bulb burned on the second-floor landing. The rest were dead or missing. Sound bled through the thin walls as he climbed a television, laughing at itself, a dog scratching at a door, a couple arguing in a language he didn't know. the ordinary noise of people surviving in the places the city had given up on. Each step groaned under his weight. His hand had found the grip of the pistol, without his deciding it should. Second floor. Third. On the third floor landing, there was a smear on the wall at shoulder height, dark and dragged, as if someone had leaned there hard on the way up, or been pushed. He climbed faster. Fourth floor. The door stood 6 inches open, and this door hadn't just been forced, it had been worked. The jamb was cracked in 2 places. Someone had put their weight into it more than once. From inside came no light, no sound, only that sharp smell rolling out into the hall, stronger now, and Emmerich finally placed it and went very still. Something coppery and wrong, cold, and faintly metallic, thick in the unheated air. He drew the pistol, thumbed off the safety, and pushed the door with the toe of his shoe. It swung inward on a room black as a well, and out of that darkness came a single sound, the soft, deliberate scrape of a blade being lifted off a floor. Someone in there was still alive, and they were waiting for him. "Don't," a voice said from the dark. "I'll open you up." He knew the voice, even wrecked as it was, thin, shaking, scraped raw. And under the fear in it, absurdly, there was still that flat administrative steadiness, the tone she used to tell him a shipment was late. "Marlowe, it's me." Silence. Then a long, broken exhale, and the sound of something metal dropping to the floor. Emmerich found the light switch by feel and flicked it. Nothing. The power was dead. But gray daylight leaked around the garbage bag in the broken window, and as his eyes adjusted, the room resolved out of the dark, and what he saw stopped the breath in his chest. The apartment had been torn apart, not searched, savaged. The one couch was tipped over and slid open, stuffing pulled out in fistfuls. Drawers hung from a small dresser like broken teeth. A bookshelf lay face down. Every soft thing in the room had been cut open and emptied. And in the middle of it, wedged into the corner where 2 walls met, sat Marlowe. She was on the floor, with her back jammed against the plaster and her knees drawn up, and she'd put herself in the corner. He understood, because it was the only place nothing could come at her from behind. A kitchen knife lay by her hand where she'd dropped it. There was a dark, dried gash above her hairline, and the mark of it down one side of her face. Her left arm was cradled against her body at a wrong, careful angle. She'd wrapped a dish towel around her forearm and knotted it with her teeth, from the look of it, and the towel had long since soaked through and gone stiff. She wasn't dying, but she looked like a woman who had spent the whole night deciding. She might. "You're bleeding on the floor," she rasped. A cough shook her. "I don't have the deposit to clean it." Emmerich had stood over hard men in hard rooms without his pulse changing. He'd done things he never let himself revisit, and slept fine afterward. But the sight of Marlowe Hale, folded into a corner of a freezing, gutted room, holding a kitchen knife against the dark, with a broken arm, hid him somewhere he'd walled off so long ago he'd forgotten it could be reached. He crossed the room and went down on one knee in the ruin. He set the pistol down on the floorboards, a thing he never did, not anywhere, not for anyone, and reached for her. "Don't," she said, flinching. "Don't touch the arm." "Who did this?" "You did, technically." A terrible little smile cracked her split dry lip. "You froze my accounts. Word got out. I was finished." Turns out when a person's finished, the people who finished them like to come make sure. Her head tipped back against the wall and her eyes fluttered. They wanted something. They didn't find it. So they got creative. "Marlowe, look at me." He caught her chin gently and turned her face to the light. Her eyes were glassy, the pupils uneven. "Concussed. Who were they?" "Doesn't matter." Her good hand rose and closed weakly around his wrist. Not to push him away, he realized, but to hold on. "Emmerich. The knife by the couch." "Under the floorboard where the knife's pointing. Get it before they come back." "Before who comes back?" "Get it." Her grip tightened with the last of what she had. "I didn't take your money." I never took a cent. I hid the thing they'd silence both of us over, and I put it under that board 3 days ago, and then I let them throw me out the front door so nobody would think to look here. Her eyes locked onto his, glassy with concussion, and utterly clear all the same. I've been guarding it all night. I was starting to think you'd never come. The board came up with a groan, and under it, wrapped in a freezer bag against the damp, lay a slim external drive and a single folded sheet of paper. Emmerich crouched with the drive in his palm and felt the floor of his certainties tilt. "Talk," he said, slowly. Marlowe pulled in a breath that clearly cost her. "The merger isn't a merger," she said it flatly, the way she'd have read him a manifest. "Sterling isn't binding his family to yours. He's swallowing yours whole, and leaving you to take the blame for the wreckage. The wedding is the cover. You marry Ophira. The two operations legally intertwine. And then, 3-4 months in, you have an accident, something quiet. A brake line, a bad oyster, whatever. You're gone. A respectable married man. Ophira inherits your share by contract. And Alaric Sterling controls both freight lines without anything anyone could ever trace to him." Rain ticked against the garbage bag. "That's a story," Emmerich said. "Where's the proof?" "On the drive. Wire instructions, dated correspondence, and the whole architecture." Her jaw worked. "And it needed a man on the inside to build it. Somebody who could move money under my name and make it stick. Somebody the police would believe. Somebody you'd believe." He already knew. He'd known since the dates didn't line up, since the photograph came a week too early, since a woman who built the traps was accused of springing one on herself. But hearing it was different. Hearing it landed like a blow to the sternum. "Silas," he said. Marlowe didn't answer for a moment. Then, gently, as if she were the one softening it for him, "Silas Voss opened the Shell account in my name in March. Alaric's been paying him through a shipping broker, overseas, routed clean. Your consigliere sold the bloodline he swore over your father's grave to protect, and he picked me to hang it on because I was the only one who read the books closely enough to catch him, and the easiest way to bury a witness is to make her look like the criminal first." Emmerich stared at the drive in his hand. He thought of Silas rising smoothly from the conference table with the folder already open, waiting for the cue. He thought of 30 years of Sunday dinners, of the man's dry papery voice, teaching a 14-year-old how to breathe through a trigger pull. He thought of Ophira choosing orchids over peonies, because peonies looked like a funeral, his funeral, the one she'd already, in some part of herself, begun to plan. He didn't shout. He didn't break anything. He knelt in the wreckage of Marlowe Hale's stolen life and let the cold pour into the place where the heat should have been, and when he spoke, his voice had gone flat and quiet and terrible. "When did you find it?" Her eyes were sliding shut. The adrenaline that had held her upright all night was finally letting go. "I found the routing on Tuesday. I tried to tell you. I said check the dates. You should have told me plainly in the room." A weak, exhausted laugh. "A story and no drive. You'd have thought I was torching the merger to save my job." Silas would have smiled and had me committed. "I needed you to arrive at it yourself." Her head lolled toward him. "I just needed to stay alive long enough for you to check the dates." "Why?" The word came out stripped of everything of rank, of authority, of the 4 years of desk between them. "Why take all of it? The frame, this." He gestured at the gutted room, her broken arm, the blood. "Why not run? You had the drive. You could have vanished and sold it to anyone. Why bleed all night in a corner, guarding proof that only saves me?" Marlowe looked at him for a long moment, and something moved behind her ruined face. Something she'd kept behind the flat administrative calm for 4 years. Something she'd nearly died rather than let him see. "Because I couldn't run," she whispered. "There's someone here I can't leave." And from the dark hallway behind the broken door, a small voice said, "Marlowe? Are they gone yet?" The boy in the hallway was maybe 7, small for it, with a mop of dark hair and enormous careful eyes. He stood pressed against the wall in a coat 2 sizes too big, clutching a paperback with a broken spine, and he was staring at the pistol on the floor. "They're gone, Bram," Marlowe said. And Emmerich watched her do something extraordinary. Watched her pull the fear off her own ruined face like a sheet off furniture, so that by the time the boy looked at her, she was only tired, only smiling. "This is Mr. Koval. He's my boss. He's not going to hurt anybody. You said, don't come out of the cupboard until you knocked twice." The boy's voice wobbled. "You didn't knock. I know. I'm sorry you did so well." She held out her good hand, and the child crossed the wrecked room in a rush and folded himself carefully against her uninjured side, and she kissed the top of his head with cracked lips and closed her eyes, and Emmerich understood the whole shape of it at once. "There's someone here I can't leave." "He's my brother," she said quietly. Over the boy's hair, "Our mother passed 2 years ago. There wasn't anyone else, so—" She lifted one shoulder, as if guardianship of a child were a line item she'd absorbed. "He was born early. His lungs never came right. There's a specialist across the river, and a medication that keeps him out of the hospital, and none of it takes insurance." A pause. "It runs about 6,000 a month, sometimes more, in the winter." Emmerich looked around the room. The gutted couch, the dead refrigerator, the single space heater unplugged in the corner because the power was shut off, and the arithmetic he hadn't wanted to do all the way out here finally finished itself. He paid her a salary that should have bought a doorman and a parking spot. She'd been pouring every dollar of it into a child's lungs, and living in a place where the door didn't lock so that no one in his world would ever guess she was carrying anything she couldn't afford to lose. She'd built a reputation as the unflappable woman outside his door, precisely so that no one, least of all him, would look closely enough to find the boy in the cupboard. She had made herself invisible so that Bram could stay hidden. And when Silas came to bury her under a lie, she hadn't run, because running with a fragile child and no name and no money was the one thing she couldn't do. "You never said," Emmerich said. His voice came out rougher than he meant it. 4 years. You never once said, you don't tell the man who signs your checks, that you're one bad month from drowning. She said it without bitterness, as a fact of the trade. "The second you're a liability, you're gone." I watched it happen to better people than me, so I did the math, and I kept my mouth shut, and I did the job better than anyone you'll ever hire again. Her eyes met his, steady, even now. I wasn't going to let him take the job too. "That job is Bram's lungs." Bram had gone quiet against her, his breathing shallow and faintly whistling in the cold. Emmerich heard it and stood up. "That breathing? Is that normal for him?" Marlowe's careful calm flickered for the first time. "No," she admitted. "He needs the Neb machine. It's electric. The power's been off since—" She stopped. "Since yesterday." Emmerich already had his phone out. "Merrick, get up here, top floor. Bring the blanket from the trunk. Then call Dr. Okafor and tell her I need her at the estate in 40 minutes. A boy, 7, respiratory, and a woman with a head wound and a broken arm." He crouched back down, level with the child now, and made his voice gentle in a way that surprised even him. "Bram, we're going to go somewhere warm, with a machine that works, and lights that stay on. Can you hold onto your sister's good side for me?" The boy looked at Marlowe. Marlowe looked at Emmerich, at the man who'd knelt down beside her on that floor and set his gun aside to reach for her. And after 4 years of never once asking anyone for anything, she gave the smallest nod. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." They were on the highway, the boy wrapped in the trunk blanket and asleep against his sister, when Emmerich's phone rang, and the name on the screen was Ophira Sterling. He looked at it for a long moment. Marlowe, watching him over Bram's head, said nothing. Then he answered and put it to his ear. "Emmerich." Ophira's voice was smooth as poured cream. "The florist needs a decision by 5, and my father's asking whether your people can behave themselves at the rehearsal. Where are you? Marek said you went to Ashfield, of all places." Emmerich watched the wipers drag across the glass. "Oh, Fira," he said. "There isn't going to be a rehearsal, a pause. I don't follow. There's no florist. There's no gala. There's no wedding." His voice was terrifyingly even. The tone he used in the second before a room went quiet with fear. "You can tell your father the merger is finished, and you can tell him the courier he sent to Wick Street last night was sloppy. He left a witness, and he left the thing he was looking for. My assistant sends her regards." The cream curdled all at once. "You have no idea what my father will do. Do you understand what you're throwing away? This was a strategic arrangement, you sentimental." "It was a hit dressed as a honeymoon," Emmerich said. "You picked orchids because peonies look too much like a funeral. Mine, presumably. I'll admit that's a nice touch." He let the silence stretch. "If I see a Lyric, or Silas, or one of your enforcers on my side of the river by morning, they won't be going home again. Don't call this number again." He hung up before she could answer, and he lowered the window a few inches and dropped the phone into the wind and the rain and watched it disappear beside him. Marlowe let out a slow breath. "You just walked away from $300 million in freight," she said. "I walked away from an accident with my name on it." He put the window up. "The wedding was always going to be the end of me, Marlowe." "You just made sure I saw the knife." She almost smiled. Then Bram stirred against her, and coughed thin and rattling, and both of them went still and listened until it passed. "They know I'm alive now," she said quietly. "The second Afira tells her father you knew about Wick Street, Silas will know the frame didn't take. He'll move first. He always moves first. You taught him that yourself, second-hand." Emmerich's jaw tightened. Ahead, the iron gates of his estate were swinging open, and every lit window looked, suddenly, like a target. "Then we don't give him time to move," he said. "Tonight, Doctor." Okafor met them in the East Wing and did the boy first. Because Emmerich told her to, and because Marlowe, even gray-faced and swaying, refused to be touched until Bram had a mask on his face and his oxygen was climbing. "He'll be all right," the doctor said at last, peeling off her gloves. The boy was asleep, under a heap of clean blankets, the nebulizer humming steadily beside him, lights on and holding. "Warmth, the medication, rest. You got him here in time." She turned to Marlowe and her mouth thinned. I'm less pleased with that arm's fractured. A clean break, but you've been walking on adrenaline for 18 hours with a concussion. Whoever set that towel probably kept you from losing far more blood than you could spare. Tell me it wasn't you, one-handed, with your teeth." "It was me, one-handed, with my teeth." "Of course it was." The doctor splinted the arm, cleaned and closed the split above her brow, and hung a bag of fluid on a pole. "She needs sleep, Emmerich. Not this. I know. You always know. You never let them." She snapped her bag shut and left. The house went quiet. Emmerich took the drive down to his study, plugged it into an air-gapped laptop, and found, as he'd feared, that Marlowe had encrypted the contents behind a key only she held. He tried the family's old bypasses out of habit. Nothing. She'd built a wall he couldn't climb. He was still staring at it at 2:30 in the morning when he heard it. The soft, dragging scrape of someone who shouldn't be walking. Walking anyway. Marlowe stood in the study doorway in a shirt of his that Okafor must have found, swimming on her, one arm in a sling, and the other braced on the frame. She looked like something that had crawled back from the edge of the world to file a report. "You can't open it," she said. It wasn't a question. "Get back in bed. You need what's on that drive before you go anywhere near Silas, and you can't read it without me." So, she lowered herself into his chair before he could stop her wincing, and pulled the laptop close with her uninjured hand. "Sit down. This'll take 20 minutes and then you can sedate me. I don't care." He didn't sit. He stood behind the chair with his hands on its back and watched her fingers move. Clumsy from the painkillers, unsteady from the blood she'd lost, but sure, the muscle memory outlasting everything else. Layer by layer the wall came down. and what unfolded across the screen was the whole machine of his death, laid out in numbers. Here, she pulled up a chain of wire instructions. Alaric's money into the broker into Silas's shell into the account he opened in my name, and here, a folder of correspondence, dates stamped clean, is the schedule. They weren't going to wait until after the wedding. Look, Emmerich leaned in. The blood in his ears went loud as surf. The correspondence was dated tonight. They moved it up, Marlowe whispered. Silas told Alaric that if the frame ever cracked, they'd lose the legal cover. So the contingency was always the same. If I ever surfaced, they'd stop pretending. No accident, no wedding, just, she scrolled, a direct strike, tonight. On the estate, while you were supposed to be grieving a runaway assistant and never looking at the shadows, how many men? Enough. Silas knows your rotations. He set your rotations. Her free hand found his wrist on the back of the chair and gripped it. Emmerich. He knows this house better than you do. If you wait for them here, you lose. He was already moving, already pulling the compact pistol from the desk drawer, checking the magazine, racking the slide. He set a second gun on the desk beside her. I don't wait for anything, he said. I'm going to Silas. Tonight, while he still thinks I'm asleep in a bed with a knife over it, he crouched, level with her, and for a moment set everything else down. You did this. You kept the boy breathing, and you kept the proof buried, and you kept yourself alive, on a broken arm, long enough to hand me my own life back. Now, you're going to do one more thing for me. You're going to sit in this room, with that door locked, and that gun, and you're going to keep Bram safe until I come back. Her eyes were wet, and furious, and terrified all at once. Don't you dare make me plan another funeral. I've done ours already. I'm not doing yours. I don't intend to give you the material. He stood at the door. He paused. Lock it behind me. Don't open it for anyone whose voice you don't know. The deadbolt slid home behind him with a heavy final sound. He didn't yet know it was the wrong door to worry about. Silas Foss kept a house on the bluff above the old cannery, and he answered his own door at 3 a.m. because he'd never once, in 30 years, believed he'd need to be afraid in it. He was afraid now. Emmerich's men had come up the bluff on foot in the dark, the way Silas himself had taught them, and by the time the old man understood the shape of the night, his own guards were down in the wet grass, and Emmerich was standing in his study with rain sheeting off his coat and a pistol hanging loose at his side. Emmerich. Silas set down his glass, with a hand that only barely shook. 30 years of composure held mostly. Whatever, she told you. She told me the dates. Emmerich stepped in, water pooling on the old man's fine rug, which was more than you managed. You built a beautiful frame, Silas. Clean money, clean photos. You just took the picture a week before there was anything to steal. And she noticed, because she notices everything, which is the exact reason you chose her to bury. He tilted his head. You taught me to check the small things. I never thanked you for that. Consider it thanked. The old man's face crumpled into something almost like grief. Your father was going to lose everything. The Sterlings would have crushed us within a year. I made a deal, Emmerich. I kept the family alive. You sold the family to a man who was going to have me buried at my own wedding. Don't dress a betrayal in a rescue. Emmerich raised the pistol. Where's Alaric? And Silas smiled, a small, terrible, apologetic smile, and Emmerich felt the floor drop out from under the whole night. You should have asked, Silas said softly. Why I wasn't more surprised to see you. Behind Emmerich, the study windows exploded inward. They'd been waiting on the bluff, too. A handful of Alaric's men held back in the dark rooms of the house, 4 of them, enough to close a trap on a man who thought he was springing one. They came through the doorways and the shattered glass all at once, and for 10 seconds the study was chaos and noise and overturned furniture. Emmerich went low behind the heavy desk. Plaster burst from the wall above him. The whiskey decanter shattered into a spray of glass and liquor. His own men answered from the broken windows. And in the ringing silence that followed, the four were down and it was over, and Emeric understood, with cold clarity, that Silas had let himself be found, that the whole thing had been bait, that the correspondence dated tonight had been planted, a lie folded into the proof, engineered so that, the moment Marlowe cracked the drive, she'd read exactly what they wanted her to read, and send Emeric charging out of his own fortress, and up this bluff, which meant the estate was undefended. The men on the bluff had never been the strike. They were the lock on the door behind him. The real force, the one Silas had built the whole night to point away from, was somewhere else. Which meant the real strike was there. Now, at the estate, with Marlowe and the boy locked in a study, waiting to open the door for a voice they knew. Emeric came up from behind the desk, and the last of Alaric's men went still, and Silas, reaching, too late, for a weapon of his own, froze under the level barrel of Emeric's pistol. "The estate," Emeric said. "You sent men to my house." "They're already inside," Silas whispered. Whatever Silas had been to him once, the man who had sold the bloodline did not leave that room. Emeric did not stay to watch. He was through the broken window and running for the car before it was finished behind him. He drove like the devil himself down the bluff road, with Marek shouting into a phone beside him, "Nobody's answering the gate. Boss, nobody's on the perimeter feed," and the whole way there was only one thought in his head, cold and enormous, a voice they know. Alaric didn't need to break down the study door. He only needed a voice Marlowe trusted, on the other side of it. And there was exactly one voice in the world she'd been trained for 4 years to open a door for, his own. Someone who could imitate it. A recording, a phone held to the crack of the door. "Marlowe, it's me, open up." Emeric hit the gates at 60 and they were already open. But Marlowe Hale had spent 4 years anticipating what her boss would need, before he knew he needed it, and she had not survived a night in a corner, with a kitchen knife, by being a woman who opened doors. When the voice came at the study door, Emeric's voice, warm and urgent, "Marlowe, it's me, let me in," she did not move toward it. Because Emeric had told her, crouched at her eye level 3 hours before, "Don't open it for anyone whose voice you don't know." And this voice she knew too well. It was too right. He'd left her furious and frightened and issuing orders. He would not come back, sweet. So she'd done the thing she always did. She'd planned 3 steps ahead. She'd moved Bram out of the study an hour earlier, into the old dumbwaiter shaft off the pantry, with his blanket and a flashlight and 2 knocks as the only safe signal. She'd wedged the study door, and left the lamp on and the chair angled, as if she were still in it. And she'd taken the second gun and put her back against the pantry wall in the dark, between the men at the door and the child in the wall. And when they finally breached the empty study and came looking, she'd fired into the dark toward the first shape that wasn't small. Badly, one-handed, terrified, and hit nothing and everything. Enough to send them diving for cover. Enough to buy the 90 seconds it took for headlights to come screaming up the drive. Emeric came through his own front door into the dark and the gun smoke, and heard from the direction of the pantry, a woman's voice cracked and shaking and absolutely unbroken. "Emeric, the pantry, there's at least 3 I can see, and I am almost out of bullets, and, if you are not really you, I am going to be extremely upset." It was, unmistakably, her. He went into the dark toward her voice. There had been 8 of them, through the gate. His skeleton watch had stopped 2 at the tree line before they fell, and Marlowe's wild, one-handed shot had left a third, clutching his leg on the pantry floor. That left 5 somewhere in the dark house between Emeric and the woman calling his name. And Emeric Koval knew every inch of this home, and they did not. And he moved through the rooms where he had eaten breakfast, and signed contracts, and pretended for years to be a civilized man. And one by one he took the house back. When it was over, none of the 5 were standing. When the last shape dropped in the pantry doorway, the house went silent except for 2 sounds. Marlowe's ragged breathing from the dark behind the shelving, and, impossibly, faintly, from deeper in the wall, 2 small knocks, a boy asking if it was safe to come out. "It's me," Emmerich said, into the dark, and heard the empty gun in her hand lower. "It's really me this time. Ask me something. Only I'd know." "You take your coffee like a punishment," she rasped. "And you've never once said thank you." "Thank you," Emmerich said, and went to her. Dawn came up gray and clean over the harbor, and for the first time in years, the water didn't look like something that kept the city's secrets. Emmerich stood at the tall windows of the master suite, with a cup of black coffee going cold in his hand and a new phone against his ear. Alaric Sterling's voice on the other end had lost every ounce of its patriarch's polish. It was the voice of a man who had sent 8 men across a river in the dark and gotten none of them back. "Silas is gone. My men are gone. You've left me nothing, Koval. This is war. This is an eviction," Emmerich said. He watched the light move across the harbor. "Silas made his choice, and it's done. Ophira is free to marry whatever she likes. My condolences to the groom. But if your trucks cross the river, if your money touches my ports, if I so much as catch the smell of one of your people in my city, you won't get a phone call the next time, Alaric. I'll come to you. We're finished. Don't call again." He hung up and set the phone face down. From the bed, a rustle of linen. Marlo was awake, propped against the pillows, her splinted arm across her lap and the wound above her brow stitched into a neat dark line. Down the hall, faintly came the sound of a nebulizer humming and a 7-year-old laughing at cartoons. The power on, the lights holding, the lungs working. "You didn't shoot the phone," she observed, her voice still a ruin but her eyes sharp again. "You're growing. I'm restructuring." He crossed to the bed and set the coffee on the nightstand. "The Sterling accounts are frozen. The offshore structure is being rebuilt clean, and you are not touching a spreadsheet for a month. The offshore structure is a disaster, and if it isn't rebuilt by Tuesday, the shell company's flag, Marlowe. The auditors, and then we're both in a very different kind of Marlowe." He sat on the edge of the mattress close, and she went quiet. "Bram's medication is on a standing account through my private trust. Permanent. Not a favor. Not a bonus you can lose. Permanent. In his name. Whatever happens to me, whatever happens to you, there's a specialist in the city now, not across the river. He starts Monday." He watched that land, watched 4 years of terrified arithmetic dissolve behind her eyes. "And Wick Street is done. Marek's already moved your things. The building's being condemned by noon." Her mouth opened, closed. For the first time since he'd known her, Marlo Hale had no line ready. "You canceled a wedding," she finally said, unsteadily. "You walked away from $300 million in freight for your assistant." "I canceled my own funeral with my name already on the invitations," he corrected. "And you were never my assistant. You were the only person in my entire organization who never once betrayed me, and I paid you to sit at a desk outside my door and made you invisible so I wouldn't have to notice what it cost you." He reached out and very lightly touched the back of her good hand. "That's finished. No more desk, no more shadows. You run the books, you run the strategy, you sit at the table. And if anyone in this city ever looks at you or that boy sideways again, they'll answer to me for it." Her eyes were wet. She looked at the dangerous, exhausted man who had knelt beside her on that freezing floor, and set his gun down to reach for her, and driven through the dark to reach a pantry in time, and the last of the walls she'd spent her whole life building came quietly down. "I still think the offshore structure needs rebuilding by Tuesday," she whispered. Emmerich laughed. A real one. Low and surprised out of him, and pressed his lips to the back of her hand and held them there. A silent, absolute promise. Down the hall, the boy laughed again, breathing easy. "And that is how you inherit an empire. Not by marrying into it, but by being the one person willing to bleed in a corner all night to keep it standing." Marlo Hale lost her job, her name, and every locked door in the city in a single day. And the man who'd been blind to her for 4 years finally saw that the quiet one at the desk outside his door had been holding his whole world together the entire time. Their turn from boss and assistant into an unshakable, ruthless pair is exactly the kind of hard-won loyalty we can't get enough of. If this dark, tense ride hit you the way it hit us, do us a favor, hit that like button, subscribe, and share this with someone who loves a slow-burn mafia story where the quiet ones turn out to hold all the power. And tell us in the comments, what was your favorite moment of Marlowe outsmarting them all? See you in the next one.